To win elections, candidates not only need to understand the new technology of social media platforms, they need to be able to harness the power of real people to do battle in an organized fashion on social media from the get-go. And this is why I am so passionate about DemCast, whose mission it is to do just that, to organize citizens and people on social media to push back against the lies and propaganda, to amplify what Democrats really stand for, and yes, when necessary, to hold the media accountable for how they are covering campaigns. I hope that after tonight's program, you will also be excited about what DemCast can do and what it has done, and that you will throw your support behind them as well.
I am very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be with you all because what DemCast is doing is addressing what I see as the biggest deficit and the biggest problem that Democrats have. I have been in Democratic politics for 20 years. I have worked for senators, I worked for Senate leaders, I worked on multiple presidential campaigns. I worked for President Obama for 6 years in the White House. And throughout that period, whenever I would go to a convention or a fundraiser or anything else, I would always get this question, like, why are Democrats so bad at messaging? Why are we getting beat? Where's our slogan? Where's our bumper sticker? Where's our soundbite? And while I will stipulate that Democratic messaging can always be better, I have come to the conclusion, particularly since 2016, that the biggest problem Democrats have is not message, it's megaphone. And our messaging is being drowned out. We can spend all the time in the world thinking about what we are saying, but what we're missing is what voters are hearing. And they are not hearing what we're saying. Even if we have the perfect message, voters aren't hearing. It is being drowned out. And we are being dominated on a daily basis by a massive billionaire-funded right-wing media infrastructure. We always think about this in the context of Fox News. And Fox News is obviously very powerful and very important. It was obviously very influential with the former president. But the average on any given night, Tucker Carlson, who is the most watched person on Fox, gets 4 million or so viewers. That's a lot of people for cable news. That is a fraction of the electorate. It's a fraction of the people who drive the conversation. But what happens is everything what happens on Fox News, or whether it happens on Breitbart, Free Beacon, Federalist, Daily Caller, OAN, Newsmax, I go on and on and on, is being carried out and put into the world. And two things happen with that. And this is why we are losing this battle. And we should be very clear. Democrats are not just losing the information wars, we are getting destroyed in the information wars. And I think a large majority of establishment elected Democrats do not realize that and do not understand why. And it is a huge problem. And one interesting thing I'd say is if you look, I just gave you a long list of, right-wing propaganda, disinformation outlets. And every single one of those is founded by a Republican billionaire who has an interest in a financial interest and a policy interest in ensuring that Republicans get elected. That is, they've created a media apparatus that operates as an adjunct of Republican Party apparatus. There is almost nothing like that on the Democratic side. There are some things that have started. Crooked Media, which hosts Pod Save America, which I work on, is a part of that. There are a handful of other things, but on a scale, it is a huge problem. And so you say to yourself, yeah, each of those things individually has a relatively small reach. How is that competing with everything else? How is that getting tens of millions of people to believe that the election was stolen, or to believe that the vaccines are iffy, or whatever the Republican conspiracy theory of the day is? And it happens in two ways. One is that messaging, that's whether it's on Facebook whether it's on Fox or Breitbart or wherever else, is being carried to tens, if not hundreds of millions of people via Facebook. And in social media, all social media is implicated here, but Facebook is the primary way in which a lot of people are getting their news, and it is the biggest driver of political conversation. And I'll give you an example of just how tough Facebook is for Democrats. On the day that Facebook's quote unquote Supreme Court reinstated Donald Trump's suspension that happened after January 6th. A lot of Democrats celebrated Donald Trump's not on Facebook. That's great. That is good for the world. It's good for democracy. But every day there is a Twitter account that scrapes the 10 posts with the most engagement from any of the last 24 hours, and it tweets it out. And I get Twitter alerts for this because I am a sick person with a sad life. And on the day that we defeated Donald Trump, we kept him off Facebook, here was what the top 10 looked like. Numbers 1 and 2 were Ben Shapiro. There were 3 posts by Dan Bongino in there. There was one by Tucker Carlson, and 8 of the 10 were all conservative figures. We had one Rachel Maddow post and one from some sort of cute pets picture thing, which did well. But that is it. Everything else was far right-wing agitprop. And that happened. I get that email, that Twitter alert every day. That's happening every single day. And so they're pumping content into Facebook. Facebook is carrying to people. And then they have built an army of people who are sharing that content. And the more the content gets shared, the more it gets shown to more people organically. I don't know if you would remember this, but there was a time late in the campaign where Donald Trump did a series of tweets congratulating his keyboard warriors, which was this army of, it seemed like yet another ridiculous thing Donald Trump was doing, but what he was actually doing is communicating directly with an army of people. They are people who are active on social media. They're digital activists. They are making memes. They're making graphics. They are making videos and spreading that world out there. There was almost nothing like that other than DemCast, which I'll get to in a second, happening on the Democratic side. We are getting outworked, outmanned, out amplified in every way, shape, or form. And the primary reason why that is happening is twofold. The first is the overwhelming majority of people who are the decision makers and the power players in Democratic politics still believe that the best way to get your message to people is twofold. One is paid advertising, usually through television ads. And 2 is through the media, that we're going to decide that we're going to give our message to the New York Times, the CNN, the Washington Post, and we're going to ask them to give it to our voters. 2 problems with that. 1, media not trusted by a lot of people. 2, very limited reach. In fact, mostly speaking to people we already have. And 3, they're taking our message, they're putting it through their own filter and then giving it to voters. And when you see all these polls that say why about how Democratic voters do not know what's in the Build Back Better bill or whatever else, and it's because we're relying on the press, which has no interest, right? They have their own interests. In many cases, those interests are noble, but they're not our interests. It is not their job to communicate positive message about Democrats. It's not their job to communicate negative messages about Republicans. It's their job to do journalism and make money for themselves. And when you hand over control of your most important asset, your message, to people who don't share your interests, you're going to lose. And I think that the second part of that problem, and this brings me to why we're here tonight, is there are millions, as evidenced by the 2020 election, there are millions and millions and millions of activists around this country who are willing to spend so much time and energy working to elect other Democrats. And we used to think that that was only by knocking doors or making phone calls, but we learned during the pandemic, people will sit at their computer, or whether they use their phone, they will text people, they will use these auto dollars and make also do all of this. And the problem with, I think, a lot of thinking within the Democratic Party is that we think of our voters or our activists as ATMs and telemarketers, right? And we don't recognize that each and every one of them are a message amplifier. They have in their pocket, in most cases, a phone that has, with a network on average of more than 100 people, whether that is their phone contacts, their Facebook friends, their Instagram friends, people they follow on Twitter or TikTok. They've access to these people and they have influence. And there was a really interesting study from the American Press Institute that came out late last week or early this week, I can't remember which, that showed that people now put more value and trust in a news article based on, not on who wrote the article or what publication it was in, but on who shared it. And that is the power that we all have, because there are people out there in our lives, they may be politically active, they may not be politically active, who will believe something if we share it with them, as opposed to if they just read about it, because of this natural skepticism towards the news. And so that is why I have been such a big fan of DemCast and what they're doing, because that is the first organization that is working to turn Democratic activists into message amplifiers. And I believe the only way we can sit around and hope that some liberal billionaire is going to buy Fox News from the Murdoch family and shut it down, or we're going to figure something else out. But the only way that we're going to have any chance, and we need to obviously invest in progressive media, like working media, of course. But the only way we're really going to compete is if we build this army of activists who are going to carry our message, because they may have the money, but we have the people, and this is our chance to do it. But we have to do it at scale, and that is something that Nick and Lori and the team at DemCast are doing.
Thanks, Alicia, and thanks so much, Dan. When I can't sleep and I'm having trouble on some future evening, I'll probably I'll go back to your endorsement and sleep well, knowing that we're on the right track here. So first of all, I'm Nick Knudsen. I'm the executive director of DemCast. We founded in 2019. Prior to that, I was a nonprofit manager at a local nonprofit here in Portland. I've been in nonprofit management for about 20 years, coalition building, development, and management of large federal programs. So I do not come from a political background, but I do come from a community-based background. And now I'll flip it over to Lori so she can introduce herself, and then I'll answer your question.
Hello, I'm Lori Coleman. I live in Tennessee, and definitely became more active in politics in 2015 with the rise of you-know-who. Always a very interested voter, but realized that I did not do enough to help Hillary get elected. And that's one thing I promised myself, that in 2020, I would not go to bed on election day knowing I didn't do everything I could to keep him out of office. And I can say that I did everything I could in helping set this up. I'm a 30-year healthcare professional. My professional life has been really spent in management of teams in different locations. So I'm well aware of having to use digital to connect people.
Thanks, Lori. So to answer your question, Alicia, so we're a 501c4 nonprofit. We founded in August of 2019, and it was following, basically Lori and I were both turned onto politics by Donald Trump. Of course, we'd both been engaged in the past, but not to this degree. And so we jumped in, both found sort of a niche in social media and began doing social media organizing, which I don't think either of us realized we were doing at the time, but that is what we were doing.
Nick, if you could just spend a moment telling us what your vision is for DemCast, if you were fully funded, what is the ultimate goal of the DemCast build out?
Yeah, well, the ultimate goal is to at least match, if not overtake, the right wing in terms of their digital traction, which is exceptionally consequential for our culture, for our politics. The good news is that DemCast is a very scalable model. We managed to achieve these outcomes with basically one paid staff during the 2020 cycle. I came on as staff in September of 2020, just before the election, at long last. So, the vast amount of this work was being done by, very engaged volunteers, which is great, but it's not sustainable. So we barely scratched the surface of what this organizing framework can achieve, and it needs to be resourced, to be frank. So we want to build out, we're not bashful. We want to build out a full-scale 50-state digital army, so that no matter where you have a cause or an election that needs attention, DemCast will be a resource to help boost it. And that's the ultimate value that we can bring to the movement.
I think this is the perfect moment to introduce our closer, Senator Doug Jones, who really was so successful at harnessing the support of social media activists in his Alabama races. As David Wasserman noted, who reports on politics for Cook Political, If everyone had outperformed Joe Biden's numbers in the 2020 election the way Doug Jones did, we would have swept the House and we would have won at least 4 or 5 more Senate seats. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Doug Jones and David Yankovic. Thank you,
Alicia,
Senator.
thank you. Thanks for being here. And Nick and Laurie, thank you. Thank you for all you did. Look, I just need to do a couple of things first. Number one, if I could replay everything Dan said earlier, I'd replay it again just to reinforce how big a hole we're in. I think it's so important to understand that. And it's even worse at this point. The best examples, I guess, is look at all that has happened in the last 10 months since Joe Biden became president. We had COVID packages that passed. We had the infrastructure bill that passed. We're on the verge of a Build Back Better bill, but yet the president's numbers are in the tank. And so are most Democrats. We are fighting to get out of a hole in 2022. And that is in large measure, exactly what Dan was talking about the social media content. We cannot rely on the media. We can't rely on all of the traditional ways of doing things. And when you think about what Dan was talking about the machine and the army that Republicans have every day that's pushing out there, and Democrats playing an uphill battle. I want to mention my race a little bit in 2017, because we're the flip side of that on a much smaller scale. Remember in 2017, I was the only race going on at the time after we had the Virginia race, we had the New Jersey race, but they didn't get incredible amounts of attention, not anything like we got in December of 2017. And our campaign was very compressed. I was a lawyer. I wasn't doing social media in May of 2017 when I decided to run for this office. I can remember my campaign treasurer, who had no experience in social media, texting me at night, excited that we had another 50 likes on Facebook. Now we were up to 100 or 150. It was just, and that's the way we were doing it. We were doing old school kind of things. Then as it became clear that Roy Moore was going to be the nominee, that's when David came into the picture and talked to all of us, helped us learn what the social media would do and how it would go. It would help for fundraising for somebody like me outside of Alabama, but more importantly, build that army. And we started to work. And what we were able to do with DemCast help, with David's help and so many others, build a messaging army on a single race. Build an infrastructure from scratch based around one single race and a single candidate. I didn't have any help from the Alabama Democratic Party. We effectively didn't have one at the time. I was getting some help from the DSCC. I was getting some help from the DNC, but it was our infrastructure on social media that really built this. And we were lucky. We were really fortunate running against Roy Moore, who had no social media presence. The best social media he had was, his horse and not a real message. And he wasn't getting any help. After a little bit, the Republicans saw who he was. And so that message machine that would have normally been in place was not there for him. And that allowed us to get my message out consistently, everything that we were standing for, all the positive things about the campaign, all the positive things about what was going on in Alabama, and have that amplified. The way Dan explained what Republicans are doing is exactly the way we ran our social media army in 2017. We built it from scratch. It got out there, and that brought in dollars for my candidacy, and it brought in volunteers all across the state, all across the country that came into Alabama to knock on doors, to be those telephone operators that Dan was talking about. But we had that army that was out there. It was an incredible, and we built on that. Now, candidly, I did best, Biden by 7 points in this race, based in large part on the infrastructure and the army that we built. It could not in 2020 compete, though, with the legions that the Republicans had to throw at me. Dan, Alicia, I think, was talking about how you get wrapped in defunding the police, socialism. All of that was thrown at me. And our Army did a heck of a job, but you could not overcome just the legions, just the day in, day out, absolute lies that were out there, some coming out of my opponent's own mouth. So to say we're behind is an understatement. To say that we need people like DemCast is also an understatement. We've got to have them. I'm just telling you folks, we've got to have them. If we don't have organizations like DemCast has been the leader of for so long now, we can't sustain the occasional victory that we saw in 2018 when we had a bigger majority in the House. We can't sustain the victory of Joe Biden because remember, while everybody loves to look at the 7 million votes that he outpolled Donald Trump across the country, when you get right down to it, he won by 40,000 votes among about 3 states. That's just the way the map is not good for us in the presidency, and it's getting worse for us in Congress. If we want to sustain these victories, we've got to start building this, and we've got to get people to understand how important it is, not just candidates and not just our party structures, but we got to get the grassroots folks out there to understand how important this is and how they can help with this by amplifying the messages. The one thing that I want to mention again, Dan talked about this, is that we're getting beat on the megaphone. And I may disagree with Dan a little bit about our message because I do think we're kind of inconsistent among ourselves and we need to have some more consistency. But the problem that we've got is that with the megaphones that these guys have against us, they take the inconsistencies and they pull out the things that help them the most. And that's what they amplify. We don't have the ability to amplify all the consistencies. And I'll leave you with the last point I'll make about that is if you look at what has been going on with Democrats in the Congress all summer long, you've heard at the media, social media, all they've done is play up the differences between the moderates and the progressives. That's all we've heard, the differences in the amount. But if you go back and you look at the tweets and you go back and you look at the interviews and everything that everybody has said, they've always ended by saying, we want to get something done. We're there for the American people. We want to get a bill passed. That hasn't been amplified the way it should be. And that's what DemCast is able to do. That's why they come up with a Democrats deliver. And so going forward, we're going to have that messaging. David, you want to add to some of that a little bit?
Yeah, well, first off, we had a lot of fun with Rainware's Force. So
sassy the whole.
Yeah, but there's a couple things that I'm thinking about through this. One is let's go Brandon. We keep hearing this and it's kind of getting downplayed by the Democrats. I'm in Ohio right now, and I was at my friend's parents' house. They're retired. They're Trump supporters. They don't have social media. Within 24 hours, they knew what Let's Go Brandon was, and they were laughing about it. How do we fight back against that type of stuff? One way we do it is by taking it over. We took over that hashtag and made Let's Go Brandon a cheer for the Democrats for Biden. That's one way that we do that. And one thing I want to say here too, everybody, and I hate being a negative, scary guy, but it's the Democrats, not versus the Republicans, and it's not versus the right-wing media. It's the Democrats versus the world. We have at least seven foreign nations that are interfering in our elections on social media at any given point. Back in, I think it was in March, the DNI released a report that Iran was involved in the last election, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, obviously, and Russia's had to, moved away from hacking us because they have the influencers. So they're pushing that messaging. There's websites that they're running online called like Redfish Stream. And these are, Russian propaganda sites that have 614,000 followers that a lot of Democrats follow. And on the other side of it, they have Black Lives Matter sites that are anti-Black Lives Matter or pro-Second Amendment. They're using every single thing that we have that divides us against us. And the only way for us to really compete against that is to show up in these places, and it's just DemCast. I don't really know of any organizations that are, really hitting on that. But kind of going back to 2017, our race there, nobody really thought that we were going to be able to do what we did. And so, at first we had to come up with a reason to get people involved, which is the right side of history hashtag. For me, thinking about it, everybody was like, well, you just lost Georgia. We put $30 million into that race. There's this guy in Alabama, we have no prayer, whatever. So the right side of history was really to tell everybody, like, some things are more important than winning and losing. You need to show up. And then, we started building our digital army based off of that. And Nick and Lori were instrumental there in the beginning of that. And really what that does is the messaging apparatus, but also Twitter doesn't win us elections. It controls the media narrative, and that helps us win the elections. It helps us organize and get our messaging out and do that. But there's only 7% of the national electorate is on Twitter. We're basically preaching to an abyss if we're just trying to get Democrats to come in and do this. We're just, it's just circular. Persuasion is really important. Getting into the places that the Republicans are, like in 2017, on our race, we were really effective in getting into the hunters and sportsmen sections of Facebook and these groups and things like that with pro-Doug messaging.
Neuroscience tells us that the more often you hear something repeated, the more likely you are to think that it's true. So what we want to do is we want to fight back with the truth. If the right wing is saying, stop the steal, which, by the way, is a genius slogan. It's genius. It's critical. We must stop this injustice from happening. Something's being stolen from us. And do you know what the left's response to that was? It's a big lie. Well, okay, it's a lie. That wasn't helpful, right? If we push back and say the election wasn't stolen, then we're repeating the thing that they're saying, that it was stolen. So we have to message in ways that our elections are already secure and safe, and they don't get any safer by limiting access to voting.
I want everybody to understand that this is not just about countering, by the way, disinformation. What DemCast is doing is not just about countering. That's a very important piece. And what Laurie just said is incredibly important, of how you talk about it and not repeating. And there's been a lot of studies about this, and the Democrats are absolutely the worst using the language that is used against us. And when you repeat that language, that's what people are hearing. But make no mistake, I don't want anybody to get the impression that this is just about countering disinformation. This is about messaging, positive messaging for Democrats. This is going back to old school in the sense that Democrats deliver. This is the kind of thing that Democrats are working for the working people. Look at this infrastructure bill and how it's going to help organize labor around the country. Look at what's going on in rural areas with broadband. It is about messaging in a way, in a consistent messaging in a way that is pro-Democrats. And what we've been doing with DemCast recently, and what I'm going to be doing a lot more going forward, I've got a whole separate project I'm working on about Democratic messaging in the South. And we're in the middle of a huge research project right now to try to get people out to vote, because it's not just the folks that are voting. We're leaving a lot of votes on the table, and we really think we know why younger people are not voting, but do we really? We're just making a bunch of assumptions based on our own people that we know, but we're trying to find out what can do that and what messages, what pro-democratic messages will resonate with people, what the platforms are going to be, and as importantly, who are going to be the messengers. Is it Doug Jones? Is it David Yankovic? Is it a hip hop star? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that we've got to look at this in a broader context, because if we don't start putting the positive messages out there on a consistent basis, working with a whole bunch of groups to get this data to, then we'll never win the countering disinformation battle. That is only a part of this. And I saw some things in the chat, and I wanted to make sure folks understand that DemCast is helping pull people together for consistent positive messages. That's exactly what impartial justice was. It's exactly what Democrats deliver is. We are where we are right now in part, not just social media, but in this country, because Republicans started that about 30 years ago, and they really started working that. And if you really think about this, the social media platforms that people are talking about are really made for local issues and local races. Look what's happening around in school boards around the country, and they're organizing on Facebook. They're getting these groups together and they're letting people in, and if they don't like what they say, they kick them out. So it's really, the platform is really made, I think, for that, to try to work on these local issues, candidates, but also issues, whether it's school boards or city council races or the local mask ordinance that might be going into place in a city.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, one thing that I work within and what I started when we were on the Jones campaign and have built it out since then is a 3-tiered influencer system. It's really important that when we have a campaign that it starts from the grassroots. That's tier 1. You know, the grassroots supporters are out there, they're putting the messaging out, they're getting that messaging from the campaign. And then from that point, that's the local on the ground people. The national level influencers then pick that up and they carry it and they, you know, amplify it. And then the third tier is celebrities. A lot of the times, like in Alabama, of course, we couldn't have Alyssa Milano and everybody on the ground with us the whole time we were there. But on social media, they could post anytime they wanted to and get us all kinds of attention. And it was coming from the bottom up. And so, you know, to answer your question a little bit there too, you know, on these local levels with our digital volunteers, they're on the ground. You know, they're in these local areas, you know, on the campaigns that I've worked on, whether it's Jones or others, you know, I get people from, you know, middle of nowhere telling us that there's not enough lawn signs or that, you know, the school board person's really good here, whatever's going on. So, you know, this digital army, they're local people in their areas, and we're able to really, you know, dig deep. It's not just on a federal level. It's not just the presidential or the shiny red object, you know, or shiny red ball. You know, we've actually it really dug down and got in deep into the communities and you know, school board members. And also there are a lot of these people are part of the volunteer network. They're out there and they're part of the DemCast network and they're running for these local offices, and by running for these local offices and being a part of the DemCast network, you have 936,000 people who can pick up what you're doing and help you and get your message out and do that stuff. So, you know, there's a really good ground game that we can do. Basically think of what we're doing as digital field. You know, everything you're seeing in a campaign, whether it's communications, fundraising, canvassing, whatever, you know, we're doing that. Digital door knocking, getting people to do phone calls, one-on-one conversations, persuasion in the field, going to where the Republicans are. And, you know, that's one huge thing that DemCast has been up to. And, you know, so absolutely it goes down to the local areas. There are a lot of these local people are coming out because they've gotten the support from DemCast and they feel like they have a platform of people who support them as well.
Hi, I'm Marion Howard, here from New York City, and I have a couple of friends, sisters, who are on the call as well. I don't think this is unique to New York, but a number of us are following you on Instagram and trying to see if we can get you some traction, but it just doesn't really feel like you guys have the presence there. I realized that you started out on Twitter, which was much more of a vehicle, but you know, since all the social justice movements and the things that happened in the last year, Instagram has really grown as a medium that people are using for this kind of messaging. So what's your strategy for Instagram? What can we do to help you grow? And or do you not see it as being an important piece of what you're doing?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Yes, our organizational account presence on Instagram is still pretty light. We did start our organization and our movement on Twitter in the last year. This year we've been focusing on building out our Facebook presence and ability to amplify messaging there. We've gone from a reach of, you know, a few thousand to 6.5 million on Facebook this year. TikTok and Instagram are right behind. The thing about our model is that it, unlike like an Occupy Democrats or something like that, we aren't as concerned with how like the DemCast account is doing on a social platform, because our whole model is about people sharing messaging via their personal social media feeds. So I would wager that there's actually more action on Instagram from DemCasters than maybe you think there is, because it's not the DemCast account that's important. It's the messengers that are important. So
I want to add to everybody here, DemCast, like what Nick was saying, that their model isn't to get 1 million followers for their accounts and doing that, but they are partnered with hundreds of organizations and getting the messaging and content out there, whether it's through Instagram or Twitter, Facebook, partner groups, whatever. They're working with everybody to also move that content through as well.
For decades, communications as construed at the White House level, the campaign level, the party level, is really a proxy for the term press relations. It is how do you manage the press? How do you respond to the press? How do you use the press to get your message out? There has been a robust and very smart, aggressive group of people who've been working on the digital side of this, but there has been a wall between the two sides for a very long time. And it's come down a little in some ways, but primarily most people in the party still think about communications as something you do through the press. And I think the only way, and this is something I have been selling with very little success all over the party for a couple of years now, is that the only way we're really going to solve that problem is we have to break down the models of how communications operations are set up on campaigns and Senate offices and the White House. We take it all the way down the ground, because after Obama won in 2008, I was working on the transition. And one of my jobs was to figure out how we set up our White House communication staff. And a very nice scholar brought me these org charts of all of the White House press staffs going back to Carter. And you take Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush. Despite the fact the internet was invented in the middle of that period and everything changed, cable news started, there was a dramatic similarity between those models. And that still, we continue to build on an old broken model as opposed to having the courage to take it down and start an entirely new model. And that's scary to people because everyone's job titles mean less than they used to if that happens. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an excellent insight. Probably it was to Trump's advantage. Apparently, he didn't care about winning the presidency because it freed him up to innovate, put the ball in the air. What the heck? I don't care. Win or lose, I win, right? So do you think these discussions, Dan, are being had right now in the party? Is there a little more support for innovating?
Yes, there is. It's trust me as someone who was there, it is very, very hard to do in the White House. There are all kinds of bureaucratic structures that make it hard. You never get 5 minutes of thinking about anything to do structural planning because you're dealing with crisis after crisis after crisis. And that is particularly true in the middle of a pandemic. But there are a lot of people thinking about these things, and there is innovation happening underneath that is working. It's trickling up slower than it needs to, but there are a lot of really smart people who have been really focused on these things, particularly since 2016, who are making change happen. It's just happening slower than we would all like.
Thank you.
Dan, why don't you take a stab at answering that too? You've been on the front lines of this for a long time about how to control a narrative. I got my ideas, but you've got a lot of experience both in social media as well as mainstream media.
So I think it's a couple of things, and Nick hit on a really important one, but let me just do sort of three. One is we have to have a better sense, we as a party, of understanding of what gets traction in this media environment. We are stuck with the media environment that rewards things based on virality, engagement, et cetera. And we have to think in terms of what works in that environment. So it's trying to fit our square peg in the round hole that exists. We have to be more creative about it. Two is we have to recognize also that conflict sells. Doesn't mean we have to be we don't have to be like Trump, we have to be Republicans, so we have to be more aggressive. Three, we have to be more omnipresent. You have to fill the void. That was one thing, the mastery of what Trump did. And Joe Biden cannot be Trump. He should not be Trump, but Trump held the nation's attention for 4 years. We don't have to do that, but we have to be out there because you're either shaping the narrative or the narrative is being shaped by you. And the fourth thing is Nick's, which I think is really important, which is volume, right? The reason we control the narrative is there are all kinds of tactical things we can do better, but the bigger problem is structural, which is they just are dominating the space. They're drowning out what we're saying. The more people, the more investment in DemCast, the more investment in progressive media ecosystem, the better opportunity we're going to have to compete, because it's not a level playing field right now.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, everyone, this has been fabulous. I hope we've answered all of your questions. And if we haven't, Nick and Lori have offered to make themselves available. They're very accessible. I really appreciate everyone tuning in for this event to learn about DemCast. And I want to give a particular shout out to Dan Pfeiffer and Senator Jones. They're very busy people, and it means so much that you're behind this project. So thank you, everyone. And with that, as I promised, the true closer is going to be Senator Jones. So take it away.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm going to close a little bit with a somewhat response. I think Amy hit really a very, very important question. And what it's going to take, but DemCast is working on what it's going to take. It's not only increasing the megaphone, but it's trying to make sure that people have that discipline. That's a real key. Democrats haven't always had this discipline. We follow, we get hit and we want to hit back. And we instead of doing the narrative and controlling the narrative, we got to develop that discipline. If we develop that discipline, we develop that message. And then we develop both of those, we control a narrative. Maybe not the whole narrative, but we don't have to control the entire narrative. But if we do those things, and that's why I think it's so important for an organization like DemCast with such reach that they have, such ability to work with other organizations, it's like that ripple in a pond. It's going to spread out. The messaging is going to spread out. Look, I think we're in a tough spot right now, but I have just incredible hope that with folks like DemCast out there, with the discipline of candidates and others and organizations, we're going to be able to start doing some of these things that all of a sudden it has taken us to get to a point where we've got control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, but yet doesn't seem to be getting the kind of public traction that we need to be for us to open our eyes and see what's going on. There's an opportunity there, folks. For every time you see something happening, there is an opportunity. We've got that opportunity now. We've got the opportunity to build it, to do something good in 2022, to do something good in 24 and beyond. With your help, we can continue to build that using DemCast as the model and bring other folks into the fold. So thank you all so much. To all of you new bundlers out there for DemCast, thank you so much for being on there with us tonight. Y'all have a great night and a happy holiday season to everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.